For Creamer Media's Polity, Mtabi Madiba, Ahmed Kathrada Foundation board member Rashid Sidad joins me to discuss the co-edited autobiography titled Laloo Chiba, Duty and Dynamite, A Life of Activism.
Can you briefly tell us more about Laloo Chiba and the role he played in the struggle against apartheid?
Sure. Firstly, to say that his name was Laloo Chiba and his middle name was Ishwar Lal and was shortened to Isu, I-S-U, as a sort of a nickname, and that's how he was sort of fairly well known. But people like Nelson Mandela, Madiba, knew him as Laloo or called him Laloo. So the names were used interchangeably. He grew up here just close by in Fordsburg as a young person, and in the late 50s, early 1960s, he got politically involved in the Congress movement, and was amongst the first people to be recruited into MK, in the first generation of MK fighters. And he, for that, was eventually arrested and served 18 years in prison, most of it on Robben Island. After that, he got involved, once he was released, he got involved in the political struggles of the 1980s through the United Democratic Front.
Isu and his group undertook a lot of successful sabotage actions. Tell us about the Seconds for Madiba, which made a massive statement and marked the day of Nelson Mandela's court appearance on October 15th, 1962.
Yeah, that was one of their most successful acts, and it happened, as I was saying, very close by here in Vredendorp, also known as Vitas. And Laloo was asked by his commander, somebody called Jack Hodgson, to prepare a massive bomb so that they can make a statement in preparation for Madiba's court appearance. And what they did was he assembled a team of people, and they had a makeshift bomb, and with a timer and a detonator, and I don't know the technical aspects to it, but he describes it in the book. And they went in, put it on these in a electrical transformer, which has oil in it, and if there's an explosion, the oil will also burn up and in fact be make a particularly great impact. So what they did, they went and they placed the bomb, and I think there was a time of like an hour or something that they needed to wait. So they waited and they waited, and eventually they realized that actually the bomb had malfunctioned, the timing device had malfunctioned. And Isu being Isu, and I think people who knew him knew that he was exceptionally brave. And because he was the commander of the unit, decided that he needed to go and check this thing out himself and decide what to do. And they were kind of working out the options about what to do and so on. But they knew that one of the options would be to actually, if the timing device is not working, is to basically just light a fuse, like you see in the movies, like they light the fuse and like you wait for a few seconds and the thing explodes. And then he decided that's what he was going to do. So they widened the fence. The getaway car was ready. He went in himself, lit a cigarette, and used the lit cigarette to light the fuse, which would go off in 10 seconds. And he said he was really completely terrified, like one of the most terrifying moments of his life. He lit the thing and ran like hell, got into the car and sped off. And within a few seconds, the thing exploded and made a huge, and it actually made a very substantial impact, because we quote in the book some of the newspaper reports. It was like it could be heard and seen all over Johannesburg at the time.
And can you briefly explain to us the impact of Madiba's persuasion on Isu and other inmates about the importance of studies while in Robben Island?
So yeah, I think that's really important point, because what happened with Isu came from a very talented family. In fact, like his eldest brother was a businessman, but his two younger brothers, the one became a doctor and the other became an aeronautical engineer in the UK, because in fact Indians weren't allowed to study that kind of thing in South Africa at the time. And he was clearly a very bright person, but when he got to matric, he became very lazy. He started sort of, getting with the wrong crowd. he started associating with somebody called Sharif Khan, was a local gangster, very famous in the 1950s, and actually, in fact, failed matric. And his father was very bitterly disappointed. But then, with time, he got politically involved, and then obviously went to the island. When he got to the island, Madiba and them were already there, because he was in the second National High Command of MK. And Madiba said to all of them that, we here for the long haul. He got 18 years in the case of Isu, and said, you have absolutely the opportunity to study. And that's what he did. So the first thing they did was to complete the matric, which he did, and then got a university exemption, and then basically studied. I think he did a BA, and then I think he might have done part of a BCom and so on. But in the intervening period, part of the reason why he didn't finish all his degrees was his study privileges were withdrawn because they found some contraband at some point and so on. So for that reason, he didn't complete all his degrees, but they had a tremendous thing going, because what happened on the island was that they had people like Neville Alexander, who was very famous. He wasn't in the ANC. He came from a different political tradition, but they all agreed that if they had the skills to teach people, they would teach people. So somebody like Neville Alexander would teach things even like German, because actually he did his PhD in Germany. So if they studied German, he would do German. There was somebody like Endo Masondo, who used to be a lecturer in mathematics. So Endo Masondo could teach them maths and so on. So the teachers among them were basically teaching those that were going through either school or like matric or university careers.
Isu famously said after his release from Robben Island in December 1982, "I did know that after 18 years, I was freed from a little prison called Robben Island, only to enter a larger one called South Africa." How was the statement interpreted at the time?
Well, I think it was a reflection more than a statement he made at the time. But what he did, but basically what was meant by that statement was that he had come from Robben Island and got into apartheid South Africa. You must remember that the National Party came to power in 1948. So of course, in his formative years of his life, he had a lot of experience of the emergence and the legislation which underpinned apartheid, like the Group Areas Act, the Population Registration Act. All of that happened in the 1950s. And then toward the end of the 50s, the early 60s, then he goes into prison, spends 18 years, comes back to a different South Africa, not a different South Africa, but one that was much, much more repressive, and where apartheid had really been imprinted on the country as a whole. The Bantustan's policies was very much in place, and African people were being forced into the Bantustans. They were given sort of feigned independence in the Bantustans. The Group Areas Act was in full force. He lived in Fordsburg, which is close to Johannesburg city centre, but Indians in Johannesburg, for example, were forced into Lenasia, which is 35 kilometers away. And when he came back, when he was released, suddenly there's this place called Lenasia, which he knew very little about, and his wife and daughters were living in Indonesia. So suddenly he found himself in a new situation. And the early 80s was also a period of great political ferment and uprisings. Especially in the early 80s, you saw the changes. So the resistance to apartheid was also like different on the landscape. So the sense of being in a larger prison was very much there.
And upon his release, Isu became active in the United Democratic Front and continued work in the ANC underground. Tell us more about Isu's involvement in the UDF.
So he wasn't, I should just clarify that he wasn't really involved in the underground. He decided that he didn't want to put his family through that again. He was approached by Mac Maharaj actually in the late 1980s, and it's in the book, to join Operation Vula and so on. But he told Mac that, look, as you know, my family have faced, had me away for a long time. And then when he came back, he was detained during the first emergency, went into hiding during the second emergency. But that was for legal work in the mass democratic movement. But absolutely. So Isu, very soon after coming out, was told by local activists that he shouldn't just immerse himself immediately into politics, because it has an impact on both him. He wasn't banned, which was very fortunate. He expected a banning order, but he wasn't given one, which was like a great relief. Number one, and number two, I think that it would also impact on the organizations, because they were legal mass-based organizations. And here's somebody who was actually very senior in the ANC. Remember, he was on the second national high command of MK, which meant he was one of the most senior ANC people within the country and wasn't banned. So there was a bit of caution, but almost in no time he got involved. So he got involved in the revival of the Transvaal Indian Congress and played quite an important role in the formation of the United Democratic Front. In the book, Mohammed Vali Musa, who was the Transvaal Secretary of the UDF and later became the National Secretary of UDF, describes Isu's role in that particular process. And the UDF was a very powerful mass movement. I mean, it marshaled hundreds and hundreds of organizations of all types, whether they were civic organizations, political organizations, women's, youth, students, medical, think of any sector of society, there were organizations that were affiliated to the UDF. Part of the reason for that kind of organization was that what we learned about the bannings of the ANC and the PAC in 1960 was that you ban one organization in one fell swoop, you basically kill off the movement. But if you've got hundreds and thousands of organizations in every place, so for example, in every township in the country you had a youth congress, Soweto Youth Congress, Alexandra Youth Congress, Lodium Youth Congress, and so on and so on, in every township throughout the country, not only in Gauteng, what's now Gauteng. So that was an important strategy. So Isu was very much part of the thinking, and in a way, he didn't occupy a formal position in the UDF, but I mean, he was very much sought for his advice and his thinking around these issues.
And Isu was elected as a member of parliament in the first and second democratic elections in 1994 and 1999. What work did he do in South Africa's democratic parliament?
Well, in the book, I mean, he did many things, but probably most significantly, he was on SCOPA, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. And I mean, that's the committee that oversees government departments in terms of their finances. The thing about Isu is that he's actually very meticulous, very organized, and very good with numbers. Probably knows up till 19 times table. Like, you and I probably know up to 12. He knows up to 19 times. So he could do calculations in his head. So very well known for that. So he could be meticulous, go down and really with a fine-tooth comb try to understand what is behind public finances and so on, and where are the problems, and ensure that government departments are, there's significant oversight. And as it happened, this was the time of the arms deal. And one of the biggest things that Isu did was that he was very rigorous in his kind of, his oversight over the arms deal. And you'll see, if you read the book, you'll see that he worked very closely with Andrew Feinstein, who was the chair of that committee. And in fact, Andrew was then dismissed by by the whippery, as it's called in Parliament, and Isu was very upset about it, but basically continued doing that work. So I mean, that was his contribution. It wasn't in the newspapers, but the people who he worked with on that committee basically attest to his rigor in doing that work.
And in later years, Isu became a vocal critique of former President Jacob Zuma, calling on him to step down. Why do you think Isu came to this position?
Well, I think it's what Zuma was famous for. I think state capture, befriending the Guptas in a big way, paving the way for his children and especially his son, to associate with people who were basically looting the state for things like Inkandla and so on. I think that it's the poor governance that Zuma was responsible for. I mean, there's no leadership. I mean, Zuma was basically more interested in filling his pockets than he was in really leading and being presidential in our context at a time when the economy was basically declining after 2008, for example. We had a big downturn in the global economy that made a severe impact on South Africa. So it's all of those things. I think there was like a real sense of disappointment that here was somebody who, in the case of Zuma, also spent, he spent 10 years on Robben Island, spent all of his time in exile, had a pretty tough time in exile in Mozambique, for example, but came back and ended up betraying the revolution in a way, and I think that's what disappointed people like Isu Chiba and Ahmed Kathrada, who was his best friend.
And talking about Ahmed Kathrada, Isu considered Ahmed Kathrada as his best friend and political mentor, and was devastated after Kathrada passed away in March 2017. Tell us more about their friendship.
Oh, it is phenomenal to observe. There's only roughly a year difference between Ahmed Kathrada and Isu. Kathy was born in August 1929 and Isu was born in November 1930. So they were just a year and a few months difference. So they came from the same generation. Kathy was involved from a very young age. From the age of 11, he famously used to sell, Young Communist League pamphlets and so on, and became I think by the time he was 16, he was already arrested several times and so on. So Isu did not come from that tradition, and Isu actually got involved much later than people in his generation. So he only got involved from the late 1950s and into the early 60s. But they had common friends, and they began to kind of know each other and so on. And in fact then became, and I think, of course, politically Kathy was much more senior than Isu, and I think, but Kathy could observe Isu's great qualities, his intelligence, his discipline, his bravery, and so on, which is what we as editors also kind of try to make sure comes out in a significant way. It is an autobiography written by him, but we emphasize those parts, if you see what I'm saying. Anyway, and when they got to the island, when Isu got to the island, they just hit it off, even more than they did, before, and became firm friends. And I think politically, their thinking was in the same kind of way, because there were lots of debates and discussions on Robben Island at the time. It wasn't like everyone agreed with each other. In any political kind of context, you always have contestation of ideas, but they had very similar views about things and so on, and became like friends. And Isu always saw Kathy, who was his elder, both by age but also politically, as somebody who would mentor him, politically and so on. And when he came out, when Kathy was released in October 1989, Isu was already out for 6-7 years by then. And Isu was Kathy was brought to Lenasia, to his brother's house, and Isu also lived in Lenasia. So did I, by the way. And so, but before we could even get, Isu was already there, was like among the first to be informed by the family. And as he says in the book, we shed a few tears, kind of reuniting. And from that point onwards, they maintained and strengthened their friendship. They would meet at least once a week. And some of it was like serious discussion, some of it was like, kind of like talking politics and so on. But often it was just, two older men kind of bantering on. So I have a lovely picture of them at a friend's birthday celebration, and they're looking at their phones and they're working their phones. So I said, and what are you guys doing? I think this picture of them, like looking down at their phones, and they say, no, well, we just, checking our emails. So it was really great that these two old men in their sort of 80s can actually still check email, on their phones. That was phenomenal.
And lastly, talk to us more about the establishment of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, which Isu was involved in, together with Ahmed Kathrada's wife, Barbara Hogan, and others.
So Kathy also served only one term as an MP. He was parliamentary councillor to Madiba, and that was his job as an MP. But after the first term, from 1994 to 1999, he said, well, I've had enough, I want to do other things. And he was concentrating on writing his memoirs and other things, so he left Parliament in that way. But Isu served another term, and that took us to, 2004, thereabouts. So after that, there was a sense, actually, Kathy has got a very, phenomenal legacy to maintain out there in the public. And Kathy, and people like Isu and Barbara Hogan and others began saying, actually, we need to maintain the legacy of Kathy, because it is absolutely phenomenal. And that's how the idea of establishing the foundation came about. And I mean, I should say, by the way, I'm a board member of the foundation as well. And I can tell you that we really punch above our weight in terms of, I mean, there are many foundations, as you know, right? I mean, the political landscape is full of foundations of famous activists. But I think that what we've been able to do is to, and the purpose of the foundation is like Kathy's passion was building non-racialism. So that's the sort of the mainstay of the foundation, followed by Kathy's sort of also commitment to the history of the struggle, and that's another important part of the work. And now, since the sort of the whole Zuma fiasco, if you like, was a focus on what we call constitutionalism. So basically doing work to protect and defend the Constitution and ensure good governance. So that's been the work that, in fact, Kathy and Isu, before their passing, were kind of intimately involved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Rashid Sidat speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about Laloo, Isu, Chiba, Duty and Dynamite, a life of activism.